Our esteemed elders are Wendell George, Pamela Amos, Beth Pratt, Harriet Bullitt, and Wilfred Woods.
Wendell George came all the way from the OMAC, from the Colville Reservation area, where there's still fires going on. Pamela has lived in the Leavenworth area for a very long time and still does volunteer work in our area. Beth had just moved here a couple years ago from California and is living in one of the cottages at Mountain Meadows. We are so grateful for Mountain Meadows being here today and for all the work that the staff and board do to support the elders in our community. And then Harriet has lived here a long, long time. And Wilf, too. Wilf, as you all may know, was former editor of the Wenatchee World. And that's Roki, Harriet's friend, who always accompanies her everywhere. Thank you. Are you comfortable? So we'll begin with Wendell. Wendell will talk a little bit about himself, and they said that if they're starting to go over their 5 minutes, that I'm supposed to either do this or point to my watch. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank the Ripple Foundation for putting this program on. It's a pleasure to be here with all these people who probably have a lot more to say than I do. But based on what Wilfred said in the paper, that we were limited to 5 minutes, I had to write some notes to make sure I was limited to 5 minutes. Because once I get started, according to my wife, I never end. But the thing that I wanted to start out with is the Ripple Foundation has a little symbol of a spiral. And that spiral is, as you probably all know, is everywhere on the earth. Actually, it's everywhere. And it's a sign of life. As I was talking before this evening, or this afternoon, we were talking about, it's even in our DA, it's a double spiral. So that spiral is very good to have for us to talk about, because that's what we're talking about is our life. I just want to start out by saying that when I was growing up, I had a lot of people influence me. It was my mother and dad, my grandfolks on both sides, and I had a lot of cousins, and I had extended family. And my world, extended family was probably more important than a lot of things because we had so many broken families. And right now I have 3 grandkids that stay in with my wife and I. And I stayed with my grandfolks when I was younger. And it was during World War II when there was a lot of problems. My dad went in the Navy and I was put with my grandmother and lived on the ranch there for a while in Nispelem for a while. The thing I remember about it is we did a lot of fishing and hunting. We didn't do it for sport. We did it to put dinner on the table because that's one of the few things we had for us. We had a good lake, Owhide Lake right beside us. We got nice fish. We'd bring a gunny sack and fill it up half full because we had a lot of people to feed. I got my first grouse. I suppose you know what a grouse is. It's like a quail, in between a quail and a pheasant. I got my first grouse before I ever went to school. I couldn't shoot a gun, but I had a slingshot. And I brought that back to my grandmother, and she was really happy that I could do that. And so she helped me clean it, for dinner that night. That wasn't the only thing. When I got older, my dad took me hunting deer. And one of the things he told me when we were hunting was, the deer gives up their life so we can live. And we should thank those deer for giving up their life. That's their role in life. And they're working with us to do whatever we're going to do. So my folks also would talk at the dinner table about world events. And they always wanted my opinion. I was the only child, if you don't get that point right now. They wanted my opinion. And of course, when I was smaller, I didn't have an opinion. And so I just kind of look at them blankly because I didn't know what they were talking about. Well, as I got older, I started forming opinions. And my folks were just ecstatic when I had an opinion that disagreed with them. Because the biggest thing they wanted from me was to be able to think for myself. They didn't want me to take other people's opinions and just live with that. They wanted me to think for myself. So they did everything they could to encourage that. Well, that's when I began to realize that everybody has their own bubble of perception. Perception is 85% of your thinking. You see the physical world with all your senses, your sight and all the senses, but then your brain takes that and stores it and puts it away, and you use that later. Now the problem with that, it also includes all your intuition, your emotions, your feelings, which kind of taints the thing that's stored away. So when you bring that out, you find that what you stored is not foolproof. Most faults of thinking are faults of perception. And I'll have a few examples here, and I know all of you can bring up more examples. One of them is seeing the only part of the situation. Let's say your brother-in-law tells you that your kids at the picnic, family picnic, really messed it up. They did some things really bad. So you feel bad about that, so you go ask the other people that were at the picnic, did my kids mess it up? They all say no. Your brother-in-law obviously had just one viewpoint, and it was only part of the situation. Another one is having an inadequate frame of outlook. Let's say you grew up in a city, never been out in the country at all, and you have an occasion to sit down with a person that was from a farm. And first thing you do is start telling him how to run the farm. Of course, he doesn't listen to you because he knows that you don't know what you're talking about. Another one is emotion selection of information. You don't like someone, so you think only of his faults. And of course, everybody has good points too, but you ignore those. And the one that sometimes all of us fall into is arrogance. You know you're smarter than everybody else. So you tell them, when they have an opinion, you tell them that they're wrong. And tell them why they're wrong. And you have a whole litany of things to tell them. But of course you know they're probably right sometimes. You don't know, but they know. Now, I know you can bring up a lot of other examples for things like selfishness, despair, and overreaction. So everyone acts according to their bubble of perception. We are products of our environment. Sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. It's bad when we use our prejudices and false conceptions. It's good if we realize that we're all part of nature and that we are spiritually tied to nature. And okay, you might ask the question, how do we do that? How do we tie ourselves to nature? Well, you start out by connecting, by well, you start out by not thinking so much with your head. You think with your heart. Think with your heart, and you're bypassing that ego up there that you've created all those prejudices. So you limit your thinking there, and you start thinking about nature. And when I say nature, I mean trees, I mean animals, the land, and the people, and even the galaxies. And that's the bottom line. It came out right.
Thank you so much, Wendell. I didn't want to cut you off. There's so much wisdom there. Pamela, would you like to share?
Well, I was interested to hear Wendell commenting on being an only child, because I also was an only child. And I think one thing it did for me, or to me, was make me think that everybody was going to be nice to me and take care of me and do what I wanted. And it took a while to realize that things are not like that, in fact. And so recently I've been thinking, you know, my major failure as a younger person, and something I would encourage everybody to work on, is understanding politics. Not just national politics, but politics in terms of your personal relationships, getting along with your neighbors, the people you work with, all of that kind of thing. And I've been thinking about that a while, because my failure to understand that there were people who would consider their motivations more important than mine, and would not necessarily be really nice and kind to me when I wanted them to, in spite of the fact that I smiled at them and tried to treat them properly. That has caused me a considerable amount of trouble in my life. So I was thinking I need to be more political. I need to understand, you know, what's going on here and why people are doing what they're doing and so forth. And then more recently, I've been thinking that what I was calling political awareness was probably really a matter of not attending enough to other people and what it is other people want and other people need and where they're coming from. So that finally it's come to me that this is perhaps a much more humanitarian issue than I originally thought. And I've discovered that if I work on that with people that I'm trying to deal with and understand, really understand where they're coming from and what their needs and desires are, that even if they're trying to do me in, my attitude toward them changes and life is a lot better and easier, even though I may not prevail in what it is I want, because I no longer feel so wounded and abused. So that would be my suggestion for younger people, is that you start really understanding what the people you're dealing with, where they're coming from, and what's motivating them. And then you will not only probably deal more effectively with them, but you will also have a much better feeling about them, and life will be a lot more bearable and pleasant. So, my crumb of wisdom.
Thank you, Pamela. There's great wisdom in that. And now, Beth.
I too am an only child. Yeah, we didn't know that because we don't communicate. But my message is that several generations, hopefully, our families are here today. And we were all born at different times. We don't know what happened the day before we were born. We absorb the world around us about the world now and before from our elders. I'm among the oldest here, so let me tell you a little about my world. I was born in Pasadena, California in 1932, heart of the Depression time, in a land at that time. The LA basin was full of orange trees. Small towns, no freeways, no smog. Much like we live here now 80 years later. Enjoy it. It will go away in 80 years the way that LA did, maybe. Maybe not. My father at that time was lucky. He had a job with the Edison Company, which made him kind of okay with the world. So 4 years later, he bought a house. And at that time, he made $100 a month. The mortgage was $27. He had to refinance to $25 because $27 was more than the mortgage lenders would allow. Well, that gave me a bedroom of my own, a home of my own. My daddy was a gardener, beautiful gardener, raised chickens and vegetables and all that good stuff. And my time up till the 7th grade was really beautiful. I was a lucky child. Then, change, challenge. 7th grade, they made a move to Ventura, California, which was a beautiful place. I lived in the Ojai Valley, which was, again, orange groves, mountains. I always had mountains in my life. I forgot the most important thing that happened to me when I lived in Altadena. Pearl Harbor came, and I was having a picnic up at the foot of Mount Wilson and didn't know till afternoon that we had been bombed at Pearl Harbor. Wow. From then on, it was sirens, blackouts, radio, fear tactics. In my schoolroom, 6th grade at the time, they put on the ceiling pictures of Japanese aircraft so that when we were bombed, we would be able to identify the aircraft. Scary. I was 9 years old, so it didn't really bother me except for what was happening. My daddy was too old to go to war, so that was, you know, okay. We deal with all of that. But big thing was when I had to go to a new school in a new place in the 7th grade. New challenges, new people. It's scary. So I had to find something to make it good. So there was horses, which I learned to ride and become absolutely at home with. I learned how to play tennis since Ojai had the only 4 tennis courts in the whole southern part of California, so they brought all the big tennis championships to Ojai, and I got to meet Don Budge and some of those other famous tennis people, and I just thought, ooh, this is what I have to do. And I learned to surf. I was before surfboards. The way you did it then was to take a pillowcase, get it wet, wrap it up, put it under your arms, and take a wave. before surfboards. I was the first. And my PE teacher at that time saw that I was pretty athletic, and she was my motivation to go on and become a physical education teacher, which I did. Another challenge was my folks moved me after my junior year of high school and put me in a new school as a senior in Visalia, and I thought, horrible, I can't do this. And it turned out to be absolutely a wonderful year. I was into everything, and tennis and all that stuff just took me right on. Then it was Fresno's change was okay after that. I'd done it. Fresno State, that was okay. Went off to the University of Colorado as a new adventure. Very close. Okay. One last thing. As going into physical education, I had to take a lot of science classes. So I found myself in a pre-med anatomy class. And I sat next to a boy named Jay Kranz. On my right, where I could give him the elbow, my name was Lane, so it was Lane Kranz. He became my helper, my lab partner, my friend, and my husband. The day after I graduated, we were married, and we had a wonderful life going on into his medical practice, and we had this wonderful young man that was our delightful son, who is now a doctor in your community. And here I am at this late date after many, many, many things that I can't tell you about. I don't have enough time, you're right. You're right.
I sure hate to interrupt you, Beth. This is great. Thank you so much, Harriet. Love to hear from you.
Okay, well, I had an older brother and sister, and when I was a little girl, I really wanted to be an only child. I really did. My older brother and sisters, 4 and 5 years older, teased me unmercifully. And so I've dealt with that. Rather than talking about the different pressures and challenges that have influenced different decisions and choices that I made, I'd like to move my 5 minutes to the people who came before me. And I'd like to talk about my grandparents and my mother, because, and then you'll see why probably the biggest influence on everything that I have done, or where I am today, whatever you may have heard, really came from influences that came from my grandfather. He was disabled. He lost an arm. He was an amputee because his family was in the timber business back in Michigan. And he got a sliver in his arm. This was in the last part of the 1800s. Well, they didn't have any penicillin then. And his arm was amputated. That was the only thing they could do with gangrene at that time. So as long as I knew him, he had a wooden arm, and he had this wooden hand sticking out of his sleeve. I think he could remove that arm once in a while. But he learned as a young teenager, his grandmother, who I never met, she was back east, but I guess she was a real autocrat. She was going to raise him, and there were other sons too. He had several brothers. he was going to face life just like his brother, and he was going to work, and just because he was missing an arm, that wasn't going to make a bit of difference. He had to cut wood and stack it, and he figured out ways to do everything with his left arm, and he had been right-handed. Well, he learned to do everything. He learned to shoot birds and to fly fish and to play golf and to drive one of the earliest cars in the early part of the 20th century. And he got help whenever he needed it, but he did everything with his left arm. Well, my mother grew up with a father like that, who had met all the challenges in his life with his left arm, without his right hand. He could write, he could do absolutely everything. And in those days, people did write. They even wrote letters to each other. Yeah, they don't anymore. He didn't have an email to click, or a cell phone. So she grew up with the influence of a father who was severely disabled, but he wasn't stopped. To him, nothing was impossible, because he learned that from his mother. He started a sawmill when he moved out to Seattle. Well, they ran out of trees in Michigan. I guess his ancestors and he and his colleagues had cut most of the trees in Michigan, and he was told, come to the Northwest because there's no end of trees. They'll never run out. So come and cut trees in the Northwest, and we'll have it made. So he did, and he went to work in the woods, and he had a crew that did the logging, and he started a sawmill down near where the Locks is, on what's now the Ship Canal. And he acquired some wealth by the sawmill, because it was the first. And he brought trees from the west side of Lake Washington, and I think Douglas fir trees probably built a lot of Ballard from my grandfather's sawmill. He also he milled the timber and loaded boards and lumber onto windjammers that left Puget Sound and went south to Los Angeles, where his brother had ended up, and he was the marketing partner, and they built a lot of Hollywood and Los Angeles, which were growing cities at that time. And if you go to either one of those places, you'll probably see a lot of Northwest Douglas fir trees in some of the old houses. Well, he did pretty well until Weyerhaeuser came to town, and Scott Paper and some big competitors. He had done pretty well, and so he used his money to buy downtown real estate in Seattle. And Seattle at that time had a lot of vacant land. It wasn't covered with parking lots because people didn't have that many cars. So they were parking, of course, leaving their cars everywhere. And he bought a lot of that land and built buildings. A lot of the downtown buildings were built by my grandfather. And he had a really sharp business head, as you can imagine. And he did very well, and he acquired more wealth through real estate and building buildings. Well, then came along the Depression and crash. Everybody started leaving the buildings, and then my grandfather died. My mother then had married a young lawyer he wasn't so young, he was a lot older than she was. He was from Kentucky, and politics was his main calling. And he came to the state of Washington, looked around, being a Southern Democrat, thought, where in the hell are the Democrats? There weren't any. I mean, none. The legislature had no senators who were Democrats, and only 4 legislators. So he thought this has to change, and he got into it and began organizing a Democratic Party. And that was kind of his claim to distinction for his lifetime before he died. he wasn't a terrific vote getter when he ran for things, but he was an organizer, and he put together a party which is trying to thrive today, but he left that kind of a stamp on our family because he was the only Democrat in our very conservative neighborhood in the north part of Seattle. So we were known as kind of the outcasts. People liked us, but we were thought to be weird. But my mother, my main point is this meeting of a handicap, because he really was handicapped. He could do all sports and everything, but he was, I mean, if you don't have your right arm, that's a handicap. And he was able to meet it with all sorts of creative experiences, and he managed anyway. And he was admired by a lot of people, had a lot of friends. But my mother, she was the one girl. Oh, okay, one more minute. I have to get to my point. The point is that she was handicapped because she was a woman, and she discovered that after her husband died. And he never really made any money in politics because Democrats didn't make much money in those days. But so she was stuck with supporting the 3 children and getting us educated somehow. And she had a handicap because she was a woman who was thrust into a man's world. And she had to make it on the office building that she was left by her father. She didn't know how to run a building. She had to find a manager and get the elevators fixed. And of course, people tried to take advantage of her. But she learned how to deal with men. And she taught us a lot about that. She really did. She made the most of it. And she became very successful and admired. And she died at 97, having founded the first television station in the Northwest and having some other successes as well. She was a regent of the University of Washington, but she never got a university education. She always regretted that, and that was adversity for her. It was a handicap. But I learned probably more than anything in my life from my mother. She's probably my strongest influence. And that's about all I can say about her, but she got it from her father. And she was a wonderful lady.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Harriet. Thank you. And now, Wilf.
My turn?
Your turn.
Okay. I grew up out of the shadow of a well-known father whose aim was to put water on the land in the Columbia Basin. He didn't quite make it. When he died in 1950, I took over the paper. In the middle of a tremendous fight about the PUDs, a Republican governor, Republican legislature was bound and determined to kill off the attempt of Chelan PUD to condemn the Chelan Dam in favor of the PUD. We had 2 Republican legislators, Eva Anderson and Joe Lester, who were able, with the help of a number of Republicans from non-PUD counties, to stave that off. But that tied up the legislature for 5 years, from 1983 to 48 to 93. 48 to 53, that's 5 years. And finally, that enabled the PUD to really move ahead and get into business and become, of course, what we have today is the cheapest electricity in the whole country. We are doing things a little differently today, however. Instead of fighting, we've gone to a smarter way to do it, of avoiding the confrontations of so many things that happened back in those days. The Forest Service has been paralyzed by litigation, and finally they're finding a way to get around it. Over in Spokane, they've got a new foundation dedicated to not negotiation, but to talking. And that is something that we've got here in Chelan County. The Chelan Douglas Land Trust, one of our biggest enterprises, is currently getting ready to hold a bunch of talks up here and in Wenatchee about what the future of the upper Wenatchee Valley is going to be. And they're asking us to ask ourselves what kind of a communities we want up here and down there. And there are going to be meetings in October to talk about that. The value of avoiding confrontation is something that, fortunately, we're learning is a very important way to handle things. And in my opinion, that's going to be the secret of how we're going to get things done in the future. We have had so many attempts with litigation. The Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, any natural agencies that are handling our national assets have been really hamstrung about getting things done. But I think we've got a way to see it down. So, in my opinion, the ability of us to use talking about each other and getting acquainted with each other is going to be the future and a way of the future. And that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you, Wilf and elders. We would now like to open the floor to questions. And we have two mic runners, Celia on this side, Marion on the other. Simply raise your hand when you have a question you would like to ask. You can address a certain elder or send it out general. And the mic runners will give you the mic.
Well, I'm curious. Thank you all. That was really enlightening. And there's some great wisdom there. I'm curious from each of you, what is the one thing that gives you hope and confidence for the future? Is there one thing that you can describe about the future? What gives you hope and confidence for a great future for our region, our country?
We thought that you all could answer that.
I would just like to say our hope is in our future generations. I have 6 kids and 6 grandkids. And my kids I have a lot of disagreement with. I don't know why, because I thought I grew them up right, but my kids, have brought up 6 grandkids that have a whole different perspective. They are looking to the future differently than the rest of us are. I think the rest of us have so much bad news all the time. Sorry about that for those that's in the newspaper business, but it's bad news. And it kind of gets us down after a while. But those younger kids are walking right through it. They understand it, they hear it, they understand it, but they don't let it get down. They say, well, I'm going to do this anyway. And that gives me hope that our future, the civilization's future, is going to be taken care of by that generation and future generations.
That goes back. You're born, you don't know anything about last year, and your hope is that you will see that you don't use cloth diapers anymore. You don't, you have TV built in, so you go with TV, you go with your cell phones, you go with your computers, you forget all that stuff that's gone in the past, and you make what's here work for you to make everything better.
Mine was very much the same, so it might, if you don't, want to speak to it, that's fine. But just, I think it was shared like a crumb of knowledge. If you could share one piece of advice for the future generations, if you had to sum it up in a sentence or two, I think it was already, shared, a couple of you up there, get to know one another, have more empathy for people. But just for our younger generations, just one word of advice.
Okay, that nothing is impossible. I learned that from my mother, who, for little girls at that time, there was a lot of things that seemed impossible. All of the schools were for girls. They didn't teach math and physics, and a lot of things were not open. A lot of jobs were not open to women. Women were considered a source of free services. And in my family, she taught us nothing is impossible. You can do whatever you want, not all at once. And you may change direction from time to time, but there is nothing impossible. All roads are open. I wish everybody knew that when they were young.
If you have a dream, follow it. My daughter brought home papers for homework, which she drew Barbie dolls on. And the teacher finally asked me to have her stop that. My daughter is now an artist. She went on and she did Barbie dolls, clothes, fine arts. She had the dream, she followed it. My son the same way. He had a daddy that was a doctor, and he knew that he was going to do that sometime, someday, and he did. Roundabout, kinda, but he did it. He did it. Have a dream.
Huh? Oh, okay. Hi. I was born and raised in Wenatchee and then left and just moved back after 50 years being gone. So, and I'm facing this issue with my own children, but I really never thought my parents knew very much. And now I'm realizing they knew a lot, and I did not appreciate them or listen to or follow much of their advice. And I kind of find this with my own kids too. So how do we, I don't know, I now that they're gone, I wish that I could ask them so many more things and get to know them more as people and not just my parents. So my mom got her pilot's license in 1942, and She was the first woman commissioner on Chelan County PUD. I just, I didn't even hardly pay attention to that. So how can we pass on important information so that our children will hear it and grow from it and not just, kind of toss it off?
Go.
Well, I wish that we as parents, I'm now a great grandparent. I have no influence at all on this new little baby, but I wish that, and I've thought of early in life, I wish that parents, and I wish I had, done more listening to my children, and maybe they would have talked more. And I wish when I was a little girl, like 5 and 6 and 7, and maybe it's not possible for a child that age, but I wish it would have been possible to tell my parents, I'd like to go someplace with you. I wish you would take me. I would like to have a memory with you. My father died when I was 7. I don't really have any memories of going anywhere with him. But he and my mother went on pack trips out here with Dude Brown and back in the hills, and one reason that we have our home here now was because they had had some wonderful camping trips. I'd like to have been taken along. I would have been a big pest and a lot of trouble, and that's why they didn't want to take me, because I was too little. I wish I could have said, I wish you'd take me, because I like to remember going with you on some of these trips. But I didn't say that. And of course I'm not going to say that, because it was, they tell you other things, but they didn't say, what would you like us to do? And I wouldn't have even thought of that at that time. I think of it now. That doesn't answer your question, but.
For each of you, what one thing is still left most important for you to accomplish, a personal accomplishment or something that you're still passionate about that still drives you?
Yeah.
I want somebody to go out and play tennis with me. Got one.
I want to get music into the lives of little children in the valley, to have some kind of musical experience, because they'll never lose it. And Overton Berry said that when he was giving workshops in the elementary schools. He told the children, and he told me too, don't grumble about walking away from your music lessons, because whatever you learn as a little child, you will never lose. If you ignore it, you never lose it. It becomes part of your part of your bones. It becomes part of your musical soul. And if you want to take it up again in later life, you've got it still within you. And I wish that every child in the Wenatchee Valley would have that experience.
My daughter took piano lessons, would not go to recital, ended up singing in Aspen in a nightclub for 10 years, skied daytime, played music at night. She came back a couple of years ago and is in a band, all-female band in Hawaii now. And she plays the piano, and she said, Mom, I didn't forget. I remember how to play the notes. So music in our family was always very important.
I have a similar story. My third son was, had all our kids being taught the piano lessons. And my third son, he would get up in the morning on the day of his piano lesson, and he'd say, "This is the worst day in my life." And he just hated it. But he took 3 years anyway, and then went off to college. And he became a computer engineer, which he still is. But while he was going to college, he decided to take a sabbatical, and he went back to Washington State. Guess what he did? He studied piano, and he became expert he can play anything now. He plays classical, he plays jazz, plays whatever, because he took a whole year of it based on what he had before. And he doesn't play in any band or anything, he just plays for his own entertainment. But I only wish one thing, and I don't remember what the question was, but I wish one thing for my son is to tell his mother and I, thank you for those lessons.
Can I tell on you, Carl? Carl, this is terrible to have your kid right here, but anyway, he didn't play the piano, he played the cello, and he was very good at it, played it diligently, became very good at it, and a few years ago I said, "Carl, why did you play the cello?" And he said, "Because you wouldn't let me have a bass violin."
Can you hear me? Okay, when you talk about piano lessons, funny, I just got a text from my granddaughter, says, "Can you?" She has school, and she has swim meets afterwards, so piano is important to her, so that's what she's going to do, to get her lesson in. But as far as Harriet, when you were talking about going somewhere with your family, my husband and I decided that we would take each of our grandchildren just by themselves anywhere they wanted to go when they turned 14. Well, our oldest granddaughter said she wanted to go to Bora Bora. And so I had to kind of say, well, let's narrow that down because of budget concerns. So I asked her what she thought she might like to be when she grows up, and she said a marine biologist. So she studied that, and she decided that she wanted to go down to Monterey and look at the aquarium. So I think those 10 days just with our granddaughter are probably those things I'll never forget.
My question is, of all that you hear from all of the people who you see every day in your life, what, looking back, do you find to be the concerns that younger generations have that have ultimately mattered the least? Like, I'm sure that there's a lot of things that you hear that people tell you that they're concerned about, that having seen all that you've seen, that you're like, actually, that hasn't really mattered. What are those things?
I'm tongue-tied.
In case of my grandkids, money is no issue to them. They're not looking for money. They're really looking for companionship. That's all they're looking for. That is a little different than, I guess, I trained their parents. I trained them to get a profession, get a good paying job, and of course they all did that. But that's not what the grandkids are thinking about. They're thinking more being friends with people. That seems to be their biggest thing. As far as ambition for making money, it's just not there. Not there at all.
Something that they want to accomplish, and as long as they're on that road, you know, that's happiness. If they get knocked off that road and changed, you know, something awful happens, then they have to readjust to new challenges. That's my message.
So I have a question. Actually, since I haven't heard from Wilford yet, I'd like to hear from you first, but it's really the same question for all of you. What would you consider the most important lesson that you've ever learned in life? Am I away? Yeah, there we go. I have to learn how. There's something I need to learn. What would you say is the most important lesson that you have ever heard or learned throughout your life?
To listen to people. That's my think. Where we all fall down, we don't listen. Yeah. There's an old saying in my family that said that there's magic in the willingness of men and women to talk. And it's more important than money or machinery, but they need to talk. Yeah.
Situation, look around and see what you have to offer here. Mountains, water, fishing, boating, they're all out there for you to do. I went to a new town in California where I didn't know a soul. I looked in the newspaper and I found 3 things that were interesting. One was a women's chorus, which I went and tried out for that, and she asked me, was I soprano or alto? And I said, listen to me, I really don't know. So I became an alto. I didn't read music very well. I went and got myself a little violin, or what do you call it? Keyboard, yeah. And I practiced the notes that I could read. I could read along, and I turned out to be a valuable part of that chorus. I also saw something else that interested me, and that was Aquathenics, water exercises. They needed teachers. I went and took the course. I ended up teaching water exercises all over the East Bay in California, and I thoroughly loved it. Carried it with me all my life. And the other one was to do something on the political angle, and I failed miserably at that. But just look and see what there is for you to do.
I think the gentleman on the end answered my question. How important do you think communication is between the very young and the older? And I think he answered it really before I had a chance to get the microphone.
Hi. Thanks for all of your history and your wisdom. I greatly appreciate it on many, many different levels. My question is, you all grew up in an age where you probably had party lines. You know, when you got on the phone, there was someone else there, right? And with the advent or the continuation of technology, because there was technology then, how have you incorporated the fast pace of our technology today, given the wisdom you have? That's one. And I guess number two is, what wisdom would you impart on the younger generation on how to utilize that technology? Because it is a very big asset and it's also a liability.
Is good and bad, which, if those of you don't know, I'm an electrical engineer. And so I should be all for technology, because that's where most of our technology has come from. There's nothing wrong with technology. It's how it's used. How it's used. And I think if we can teach our younger generation to use that technology properly, we'll do well. The whole civilization will really do well, because technology is going to develop so much that we'll never recognize it in just a few years, because it's been speeding up every year. It's going faster and faster. Our problem is how to use that technology without hurting other people. And we hurt other people with wars. We hurt other people with the way we're doing business, because we get selfish in all cases. It's just like I talked about in the introduction, where our ego is taken over. We don't think of other people. We have a tribal belief that you don't do anything that's going to hurt 7 generations down. Now, it's really hard to look that far down to 7 generations, but if you do look at that, if let's say our generation, 7 generations back, said, let's not develop electronics. What if they said that? We'd have a whole different world today. But if they said that, let's develop it, but let's use it properly. That's what should be done. And I think our kids, my grandkids are all iPhones. That's all they have. Right now they'd be doing this on an iPhone. But they know how to use it. And I don't think they're going to abuse it. But there's people in the world today that are abusing technology, and that's what I'm afraid of, because that's going to ruin us if we let that happen.
I think kids have already gotten into the technology of broadcasting, space travel. Space industry is full of young people that can handle it and understand it. Engineers that are really young. And if we don't let the planet burn up, if we don't eat it, corrode it, lose it, destroy it in various ways, then the kids that are into space exploration, maybe they will have a chance.
I have something to say. My dad was an opera singer, and my kids barely never ever had a chance to hear him, but they heard some of his work. And my youngest son, he loved music on account of that singing, and he was in the choir, and he was the leading one in the choir, and they took the whole choir to even to San Francisco, and quite a few different towns where they sang. Only he was a wonderful kid. He wanted to do anything what I did. You know, I was a pastry chef, so he loved to go into pastries. I mean, in my opinion, my kids, when I think about it, they all kind of went into the footsteps of my parents or myself. And I was proud. My son, he even in high school, he had the leading part in Oklahoma and in South Pacific. And I was thrilled when he sang Some Enchanted Evening. You know, he had such a wonderful voice. So, you know, that's what I like to say, that in some families, the kids do go and follow the footsteps of their parents.
The subject of music. Remember that music and art is the one thing that human beings can do that's not destructive in any way to the planet. Everything else destroys a little bit of something. Building, this theater, just about everything we do, but not music. Music's free.
I was wondering what one thing is that you have done in the past and can look back on to love and let lower generations below you pass on to other generations.
Love your family. Love your family. Learn from them. Know that they have things to teach you. That's all.
How to cook rice without
Burning the pot.
Okay, one thing you need to know, you are a gift. You are a gift to the world. And so with that in mind, that each of you is very unique in what you've given the world and what you've given to us. Now, what gift would you like to pass on for the next generations to come? For either the Wenatchee Valley or the broader world. What kind of gift would you like to be known for giving to someone else?
I'd like to leave them music. Now that's my passion, and that's thanks to Harriet. We've got lots of it right here.
Mr. Wilford for starting a lot of things here in the musical world.
I want people to learn how to play, tennis, skiing, hiking, camping. All of these things are wonderful experiences to do with friends or family. And I've known how to do them. I've taught a few how to do them. And that's what I would gift.
In the big picture of peace on earth, but it starts with the individual, and it starts with the family, and it starts with the community. And I think a lot of the words been hearing here today is listen to the other people's opinion, and even if you disagree with them, don't use that, but try to understand them. That's where peace starts, is with us, each of us. And it's gonna, if we teach the younger kids that from the start, I think that'll eventually take hold.
Time for one more question. If anyone has another question, that would be wonderful.
Hi. So you have kids and you have grandkids, and some of you have great grandkids, and maybe they listen to you and maybe they don't. But the wealth of information and love and wisdom that you have needs to be passed on. Do you have any ideas of how you could meet people outside of your family that are younger, maybe even generationally younger, 1 or 2 generations, and adopt them and impart your wisdom upon them, be friends with them? And I'm not sure how that could work, if there could be a coffee hour somewhere in town, or but I'm wondering if you have any ideas of how you could meet someone and adopt them and become their friends, so some of your ideas and some of your wealth of knowledge can get passed on.
Do it without making speeches. Nobody wants to hear speeches. You do it with little girls. You.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking there are volunteer opportunities in the community, and it's amazing how many good ones there really are. And one of the things that I've tried to do, I've been part of the court-appointed special advocates program that works with kids who are in the dependency program, because their parents are having problems of some kind. And that's an opportunity to give these kids a friend, a role model, and an advocate. So I think for people who are concerned about this, look at the volunteer opportunities in the community, because there are quite a few of them.
I've worked with Special Olympics, and I just found that to be so satisfying for me and them. I probably can't do it now, but I did enjoy it, and I would recommend that to anybody who wants to help a child succeed in a sport.
I've been to a lot of groups, smaller groups than this, just talking about that very thing. That's one of the things that I somehow wound up doing. I didn't necessarily plan on doing this, but one thing that's happening with my 3 grandkids right now, they're all in high school. We live 2 blocks from the high school, so they come home for lunch. My granddaughter will bring her friend, sometimes 2 friends. The other 2 will bring one or their friend. That's the 3 that live with us, but one that wasn't living with us, he was on the football team, and one time he brought all 11 of his football team in. So we had to cut it off and say there's a limit to how many you can bring. But that's one way to outreach. You don't do it yourself, your kids do it. They're the ones that bring them in. It wasn't the food, of course, it was the conversation.
What problems, environmentally or economically or politically, would, like 50 years ago, were still problems that they haven't solved yet?
A better question would be, what problems 50 years ago have we succeeded in solving? Maybe we could think of an answer to that.
War are you talking about? So many problems, there's as many problems as there are people here. But the problems aren't, right now the world is causing a lot of problems. And we in the United States can't necessarily solve the world in the other countries, but they are imposing their problems on us. So it's hard for us to ignore that. But it's like I said before, we have to realize that and maybe start thinking in a different way that we're doing it instead of continuing the war. We can only do so many wars. But on the same standpoint, there's two sides of that story. We can't be isolationists because that's not the way the world works anymore. The economy that you're talking about is tied to all the other countries. So we have to recognize that and adjust to it. And it's a very difficult problem. I commend you for recognizing that. It's a problem that so far hasn't even come close to being solved, and it might be a long time before we do solve it. But there's a lot of things have to be done there, and I know all the people here realize that. So you hit it on the head, but we can't offer any solution to it because it's too complicated. But we can recognize there are problems, and I'm glad you're recognizing it. So maybe you can help in the future as a future generation to solve the problems.
Very short. 2 friends gave me a greeting card just as we came into the hall, and I would like to share it with you. Logic will get you from A to B. Imagination will take you everywhere. Albert Einstein.
Thank you so much for your questions and your time. And it is our sincerest hope that this carries on, that that you continue to connect with other generations and ask the questions, hear the answers, listen. You can go to our website where we will have these stories to read, or you can post them to our website also. We will have this event here on our website also, so you will be able to see it in its entirety as well. Thank you so much. And we will continue the conversation out in the foyer with continuing to drink and eat and talk and visit. So we are freeing up our elders to go visit. Thank you very much.